In 2016, the city of Albuquerque, New Mexico, became the epicenter of a tragedy so shocking that it captured national attention. At the heart of this story was Victoria Martins, a 10-year-old girl whose life ended in the most horrific circumstances imaginable. Victoria was described by friends and family as bright, energetic, and full of life. A child with dreams and curiosity that were tragically cut short. What made her death even more disturbing was that it occurred inside the very place where she should have been safest, her own home. The perpetrators of this crime were not strangers. They were intimately connected to her life. Her mother, Michelle Martins, along with two adult men, Jorge Guerrero and Fabian Gonzalez, were complicit in Victoria's death. The case revealed a level of cruelty and neglect that horrified investigators, the public, and even seasoned law enforcement professionals. Victoria's early life was complicated. Her mother, Michelle, had a history of personal instability, which included substance abuse and tumultuous relationships. Friends and acquaintances described Michelle as someone who struggled with her own demons, but few could have imagined that her troubles would escalate to the point of orchestrating the death of her child. Jorge Guerrero and Fabian Gonzalez were both adults with criminal backgrounds, although not previously known for acts of extreme violence against children. Together, the three formed a dangerous dynamic that turned Victoria's home into a nightmare. The events leading up to Victoria's death were marked by escalating abuse and neglect. Investigators later learned that Victoria had been subjected to physical mistreatment over time, and there were signs that she had been living in an unsafe environment for months prior to the crime. On the day of her death, this abuse culminated in the most devastating form. Law enforcement found that the child had suffered violent trauma, and the crime scene itself painted a picture of chaos and horror. The investigation revealed that the three adults had been drinking and engaging in criminal behavior in the house, with Victoria present, and that the environment was not only neglectful, but actively dangerous. The discovery of Victoria's body shocked the community. Neighbors who had once waved at the cheerful child were left grappling with disbelief. Police officers, forensic specialists, and social workers all struggled to process the scene. The images of the crime, though never made public, were described as profoundly disturbing. Evidence collected at the home included physical traces of assault, household items used in the commission of abuse, and corroborating testimony from witnesses who saw the adults' interactions with Victoria in the days leading up to her death. The legal process that followed was exhaustive. Michelle Martins, Guerrero, and Gonzalez were all arrested and charged with first-degree murder, among other offenses. The prosecution's case was built on a combination of forensic evidence, witness testimony, and the accounts of those who had observed patterns of abuse over time. Prosecutors highlighted the premeditated and collaborative nature of the crime. This was not a spontaneous act of violence, but a coordinated assault by three adults who were supposed to protect the child. During the trial, harrowing details emerged about the final hours of Victoria's life. Witnesses testified that Michelle had allowed the other men into the home, knowing they were a threat to her daughter. Testimony described a household where alcohol, reckless behavior, and neglect were routine, and where Victoria's cries for help went unanswered. Guerrero and Gonzalez were portrayed as active participants, inflicting harm without remorse. The courtroom was often silent with shock as the narrative of events unfolded. Even seasoned legal professionals acknowledged the extraordinary depravity of the actions described. The sentencing reflected the severity of the crime. Michelle Martins received a life sentence acknowledging her direct role and failure to protect her child. Jorge Guerrero and Fabian Gonzalez were also sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. These sentences served as a societal statement. Crimes of this magnitude, especially against a defenseless child, would not be tolerated or diminished. In addition to the legal outcomes, the case prompted introspection within Albuquerque's social services system. Questions were raised about why Victoria's situation had not been identified earlier and whether interventions could have prevented her death. Social workers and child protection advocates pushed for reforms, calling for better communication, more rigorous monitoring, and earlier intervention in cases of suspected abuse. Victoria's death also reverberated in the community on a personal level. Neighbors, friends, and extended family members struggled with grief and anger. Candlelight vigils and memorials were held, and the tragedy became a rallying point for awareness campaigns about child abuse. Schools in the area held sessions on recognizing signs of neglect and abuse, hoping to educate children and adults alike about the warning signs that, in Victoria's case, tragically went unnoticed for too long. The Martins case is also a chilling reminder of how domestic violence can escalate when unchecked. It exposed the vulnerabilities of children in unstable households and the ease with which adults can exploit positions of trust. Forensic psychologists later analyzed the case, suggesting that Michelle Martins may have suffered from deep psychological issues, including codependency and poor impulse control, which, combined with Guerrero and Gonzalez's criminal tendencies, created a deadly environment. Experts emphasize that while such psychological factors could explain behavior, they in no way excuse it, highlighting the complex interplay between personal pathology and criminal responsibility. Despite the horror, there is a glimmer of resilience in the aftermath. The community's response underscored the collective refusal to let Victoria's life and death be forgotten. Her story has become a case study in criminal justice courses and child welfare programs, used to educate future social workers, law enforcement officers, and psychologists about the warning signs and systemic failures that can lead to such tragedies. Advocacy groups often cite Victoria Martins when arguing for stronger child protection laws and better enforcement of existing statutes, aiming to prevent similar cases from ever occurring again. In remembering Victoria, one confronts not only the brutality inflicted upon her, but also the broader societal responsibilities toward children. Her life, though tragically short, serves as a catalyst for reflection, reform, and vigilance. The Martins case remains a stark example of the consequences when care, protection, and oversight fail. It is a narrative filled with sorrow, injustice, and anger, yet it also embodies lessons about the importance of community, accountability, and the relentless pursuit of justice. Victoria Martins will forever be remembered not just as a victim, but as a symbol of the urgent need to protect the most vulnerable among us. Between 2001 and 2005, Albuquerque, New Mexico was the silent stage for one of the most haunting mysteries in modern American criminal history, the West Mesa murders. 11 women, along with an unborn child, disappeared under circumstances that at the time seemed unconnected. Casual reports of missing persons that, tragically, would only later reveal a horrifying pattern. It wasn't until 2009, when human remains were discovered buried in the barren desert area known as West Mesa, that the true scope of the tragedy came into focus. The discovery not only shocked the city, but also sent ripples across the nation, highlighting the vulnerabilities of marginalized communities and the dark realities lurking behind ordinary lives. The victims were predominantly women in their 20s and 30s, many of whom struggled with socioeconomic instability, addiction, or involvement in the local sex trade. Names like Linda Fay, Megan Anderson, and Marie Vargas would become tragically familiar as investigators painstakingly pieced together the identities of the remains. These were real people with families, dreams, and unfulfilled futures who vanished without adequate attention from authorities at the time of their disappearance. The West Mesa case forced a critical examination of how society and law enforcement treats vulnerable populations. The initial discovery of the remains came when a local resident, walking a remote part of the desert, stumbled across human bones. Further excavation by authorities revealed the skeletal remains of 11 women buried in clandestine graves. Among them was a fetus, tragically preserved within the remains of one of the victims. The sheer number and the meticulous burial method immediately suggested the work of a serial offender who operated with chilling secrecy. The desert, vast and desolate, had become a temporary tomb, isolated enough to conceal crimes for years, yet close enough to the city to ensure eventual discovery. Investigators faced a daunting task. Many of the victims had been reported missing, but the fragmented nature of the reports, combined with the marginalized status of the women, meant that their disappearances had not been systematically connected. Forensic teams conducted painstaking work to identify the remains. DNA analysis, dental records, and personal effects recovered from the graves provided the means to finally name the victims. Each identification brought a measure of closure to families who had endured years of uncertainty, though it also deepened the horror of what had occurred. The profile of the potential offender, or offenders, was elusive. Law enforcement initially suspected a serial killer, given the pattern and methods observed. The killings appeared methodical, suggesting familiarity with the desert terrain and a disturbing comfort with committing repeated acts of violence. No suspect was immediately identified, and the case remains officially unsolved to this day. Investigators considered multiple leads over the years, including men with criminal records for violent behavior in Albuquerque, yet no charges have ever been brought in relation to the murders. This lingering uncertainty has contributed to the enduring mystique and terror surrounding the West Mesa case. Media coverage of the case highlighted not only the horror of the murders, but also the societal neglect that enabled them. Many of the victims were women who lived on the margins, and some were involved in sex work, substance abuse, or other precarious lifestyles. Critics argued that the initial lack of urgency from law enforcement reflected systemic biases, an uncomfortable truth about who is considered missing versus disappeared. Advocates for the victims' families called attention to the need for better protocols in handling cases involving vulnerable populations, and the West Mesa discovery spurred initiatives aimed at improving community policing and missing persons investigations. The West Mesa murders also revealed the painstaking and often grim work of forensic investigation. Anthropologists and archaeologists were brought in to carefully excavate the burial site. Each grave required careful mapping and cataloging of bones to ensure accurate identification and documentation of potential trauma. Analysis suggested that most of the women had been strangled or suffocated, with some showing signs of blunt force trauma. Evidence indicated that the perpetrator may have lured the women under the guise of friendship, work, or opportunity, exploiting trust before committing murder. The meticulous burial suggested an organized offender who was capable of both violence and calculated concealment. Families of the victims endured years of uncertainty, not knowing whether their loved ones were alive or dead. When the discovery was finally made, grief was compounded by anger. How could such crimes remain hidden for so long? How had the disappearances of so many women gone unconnected? Community support groups emerged, offering counseling and advocacy, while law enforcement faced criticism for perceived oversights. The case sparked dialogue nationwide about the treatment of missing persons, especially women in vulnerable circumstances, and raised questions about how social neglect and criminal opportunity can intersect with devastating consequences. Despite years of investigation, the West Mesa murders remain unresolved. Several suspects have been considered, including known predators in the Albuquerque area, but no definitive link has been proven. The desert itself, while a hiding place for the bodies, has become a haunting monument to unsolved crime, a stark reminder of the capacity for darkness in seemingly ordinary places. Public interest remains high, with documentaries, podcasts, and true crime media exploring the case, analyzing potential motives, and debating theories. Some speculate that the killer may still live among the city's population, their identity hidden behind the banality of everyday life. Others believe the perpetrator may have died, leaving the case a permanent enigma. The human cost of the West Mesa murders is incalculable. Each victim was more than a statistic. Each had friends, family, and communities who mourned them. The unborn child discovered alongside the women represents an especially poignant loss, a life that never had the chance to begin. The case underscores the vulnerability of those often overlooked by society and the importance of vigilance, empathy, and systemic reform in preventing such tragedies. In the years since the discovery, law enforcement has implemented initiatives aimed at preventing similar cases, including better coordination between missing persons units, enhanced community outreach, and improved forensic capabilities. The West Mesa murders continue to serve as a grim reminder of the consequences of neglect, the challenges of investigating serial crimes, and the haunting reality that not all killers are brought to justice. It is a case that blends mystery, tragedy, and social commentary in equal measure, a story of loss, resilience, and the enduring quest for answers in the face of unspeakable horror. Though the murders remain unsolved, the legacy of the victims has spurred ongoing efforts to protect the vulnerable, educate the public, and honor those lost. Memorials have been established, and families continue to advocate for justice, keeping the memory of their loved ones alive, while pressing authorities to never let the West Mesa tragedy fade into obscurity. In the empty expanses of the New Mexico desert, the silent graves of these women remind us that evil can exist in the shadows, but so too can the persistence of memory, community, and the unyielding pursuit of truth. The West Mesa murders are a stark, chilling reminder that sometimes the most dangerous people are those who operate under the radar, preying on society's most vulnerable. The case challenges law enforcement, social services, and the public to confront uncomfortable truths about risk, neglect, and accountability. While no resolution has been reached, the enduring attention ensures that the victims are not forgotten and that the call for justice and vigilance remains as urgent as ever. In 1999, New Mexico became the backdrop for a disturbing tale of deception, obsession, and murder. At the center of this story was Diazon Hossenkopf, a man whose outward appearance suggested intelligence and charm, yet whose inner life harbored secrets dark enough to culminate in murder. The victim, Gurley Chu, was Hossenkopf's wife, a woman whose life ended not in tragedy or accident, but at the hands of the person who should have loved and protected her. The case became a chilling example of how appearances can deceive and how obsession can escalate into fatal violence. Diazin Hosenkoff's life before the murder seemed unremarkable to those around him. He was educated, articulate, and had a keen interest in esoteric studies, including medical and chemical subjects. He often presented himself as a professional and intellectual, someone who was ambitious and in control. However, behind this facade lay a man increasingly consumed by paranoia, control, and a disturbing fascination with mortality. His relationship with Girlie Chu, though outwardly normal, was marked by growing tension, secrecy, and manipulation. Friends and family would later describe him as controlling, but few could have anticipated the horrifying extent to which he would act on his impulses. The disappearance of Girlie Chu in 1999 set off a chain of events that would baffle law enforcement for months. Hosenkoff initially reported his wife missing, portraying a worried husband desperate to find her. At first glance, it appeared to be a standard missing person case, but inconsistencies quickly emerged. Investigators noted discrepancies in his statements, delays in reporting, and unusual behaviors that raised red flags. Hosenkoff's demeanor, calm and collected in public, contrasted sharply with the gravity of a missing spouse case, prompting suspicion and closer scrutiny from authorities. As the investigation deepened, disturbing details came to light. Forensic evidence suggested that Girlie Chu had met a violent end, though Hosenkoff's attempts at deception initially masked the truth. Authorities discovered that Hosenkoff had devised an elaborate plan to conceal his crime, which included attempts to mislead investigators and fabricate an alternate narrative of Girlie's disappearance. These actions demonstrated both premeditation and a meticulous, calculated mind willing to manipulate truth and evidence to evade accountability. The motives behind the murder were complex. Investigators determined that Hosenkoff was not only motivated by personal control over his wife, but also by financial and psychological factors. Girlie Chu had become increasingly independent, and her autonomy may have threatened Hosenkoff's sense of dominance. Some accounts suggest that he feared exposure of secrets that could undermine his carefully constructed persona. This combination of personal, psychological, and material motives created a perfect storm that led to the ultimate act of violence, the planned and executed murder of his spouse. Forensic analysis played a crucial role in unraveling the case. Though Hosenkoff initially obscured the circumstances of Girlie Chu's disappearance, forensic scientists were able to reconstruct elements of the crime through careful examination of evidence, witness statements, and Hosenkoff's own inconsistencies. Investigators pieced together a timeline, mapping movements and interactions that ultimately contradicted Hosenkoff's public narrative. The meticulous nature of the forensic work highlighted the intersection of human psychology and scientific investigation, illustrating how even well-crafted deceptions can unravel under the weight of evidence. As the case progressed, it became clear that Hosenkoff's intellectual prowess had become a tool for manipulation and concealment, rather than constructive achievement. Court documents revealed attempts to stage the scene, fabricate alibis, and psychologically manipulate those around him, including friends, family, and law enforcement officials. His actions were not impulsive, they were calculated, demonstrating a chilling level of premeditation. Legal experts later emphasized that the combination of intelligence and criminality in Hosenkoff's behavior is not uncommon in cases of domestic homicide, where manipulation, deceit, and careful planning allow offenders to initially evade suspicion. The trial of Diazin Hosenkoff was intense and highly publicized. Prosecutors presented a compelling case built on forensic evidence, witness testimony, and behavioral analysis. The court heard about Hossenkopf's prior psychological tendencies, the inconsistencies in his reports to authorities, and the physical evidence linking him directly to Gurley Chu's death. The defense attempted to argue mental instability and claim lack of intent, but the overwhelming weight of evidence painted a clear picture of deliberate, calculated murder. Ultimately, Hossenkopf was convicted of the murder of Gurley Chu and sentenced to life in prison, with additional time for related offenses. The sentencing underscored the seriousness of domestic homicides and the judiciary's recognition of the premeditated, manipulative nature of the crime. Incarceration ensured that Hossenkopf would no longer pose a threat to others, yet the broader impact of the case extended far beyond the prison walls. The story became a cautionary tale, illustrating how outward normality can conceal extreme danger, and how the intersection of intelligence, obsession, and control can manifest in fatal ways. The case also prompted discussions about the warning signs of domestic violence and the importance of vigilance by friends, family, and authorities. Gurley Chu's fate might have been prevented had the subtle signs of manipulation and control been recognized and acted upon sooner. Advocacy groups often cite the Hossenkopf case when educating the public about coercive control, emphasizing that murder in domestic contexts rarely arises from a single impulse. It often emerges from prolonged patterns of psychological domination and calculated threat. Psychologists who reviewed the case later noted that Hossenkopf exhibited traits consistent with obsessive, controlling personalities, coupled with an ability to disassociate from moral accountability. This psychological profile helps explain, though not excuse, the meticulous and cold-blooded execution of the crime. It also highlights a broader societal challenge, identifying and mitigating risks posed by individuals who can mask dangerous behaviors behind intelligence, charm, or social respectability. In reflecting on the legacy of the case, it is evident that the story of Diazin Hossenkopf and Gurley Chu is one of dual tragedy. There is the personal, intimate tragedy of Gurley's life violently taken, and there is the societal tragedy of a system initially deceived by appearances, delaying justice. The case serves as a touchstone in the study of criminal behavior, forensic investigation, and domestic homicide, providing lessons for law enforcement, social services, and the public at large. For the families affected, the conviction brought a measure of closure, though it could never fully repair the damage caused by Hossenkopf's actions. Gurley Chu is remembered not only as a victim of a calculated homicide, but also as a symbol of resilience in the face of manipulation and deceit. Advocacy efforts, education programs, and criminal justice courses continue to reference the case, using it as a tool to explore the complexities of domestic violence, the importance of forensic evidence, and the critical need to recognize subtle but dangerous patterns of abuse. In the end, the Diazin Hossenkopf case is more than a story of murder. It is a narrative of warning and awareness, illustrating the deadly consequences of obsession, control, and deceit. It underscores the necessity for vigilance in relationships, the importance of forensic science in revealing hidden truths, and the enduring need for justice in cases where outward normality masks inner danger. The tragedy of Gurley Chu and the calculated actions of Hossenkopf remain a stark lesson. Evil often wears a familiar face, and vigilance, personal, professional, and societal, is our most essential defense. In 2023, The quiet town of Farmington, New Mexico, was shattered by an act of violence that left the community reeling. The attack was sudden, brutal, and incomprehensible. 3 elderly women, Gwendolyn Schofield, Melody Ivy, and Shirley Voita, were shot and killed in their own neighborhood by an 18-year-old named Bo Wilson. The tragedy unfolded in a residential area where neighbors often knew one another by name, in a town where violent crime of this scale was rare. Yet, in a matter of moments, the familiar rhythm of everyday life was replaced by horror, grief, and the urgent work of law enforcement. Bo Wilson was a young man whose life, on the surface, seemed unremarkable. He had recently transitioned from adolescence to adulthood, living in the Farmington area and interacting with peers and family in ways that did not initially raise alarm. However, in the weeks and months preceding the shooting, Wilson displayed troubling behaviors, though subtle enough to evade detection by friends and community members. Psychological experts often note that individuals who commit sudden acts of mass violence may display signs that, while noticeable in hindsight, are easily overlooked in the moment. Social withdrawal, fascination with weapons, and sudden shifts in mood or behavior. For Wilson, these signs went unnoticed until it was tragically too late. On the day of the attack, Wilson entered the neighborhood and began shooting indiscriminately. The victims, 3 women in their 70s and 80s, were targeted in what would later be described as a seemingly random act of violence. Gwendolyn Schofield, Melody Ivy, and Shirley Voita were well known in their community for their kindness, involvement in local events, and the simple dignity with which they lived their lives. None of them had personal conflicts with Wilson, and there was no known motive beyond the perpetrator's apparent desire to inflict chaos and death. The randomness of the attack amplified the horror, leaving neighbors and law enforcement alike struggling to understand why such a young person would commit such a heinous act. Police response was swift. Officers arrived at the scene within minutes, confronting Wilson in the neighborhood and ultimately neutralizing the threat by shooting him. The fact that the shooter was stopped by law enforcement prevented further loss of life, but the aftermath was devastating. Crime scene investigators combed the area for evidence, documenting shell casings, trajectories, and the precise locations where each victim fell. Witness statements, surveillance footage, and ballistic analysis were collected to reconstruct the sequence of events and determine exactly how the tragedy unfolded. As the investigation proceeded, more details emerged about Bo Wilson. Friends and acquaintances described him as quiet, sometimes withdrawn, but not overtly threatening. Background checks revealed a history of minor legal issues, but nothing that would have predicted mass violence. Psychologists analyzing the case suggested that Wilson may have experienced a sudden psychological break or escalation of underlying mental health issues, though the specifics remain partially speculative. What is clear is that his actions were deliberate and fatal, highlighting the unpredictable nature of youth violence and the challenges communities face in identifying potential threats before tragedy strikes. The victims' families and the wider community were left grappling with profound grief. Gwendolyn Schofield was remembered for her volunteer work at local charities and her commitment to her church community. Melody Ivy was cherished for her gardening, warmth, and decades-long friendships. Shirley Voita was admired for her dedication to her family and the quiet strength she brought to her neighborhood. Their deaths left an irreplaceable void, and the emotional toll extended beyond immediate family members to friends, neighbors, and the first responders who witnessed the aftermath. Vigils and memorials were held, reflecting both sorrow and solidarity in the face of inexplicable violence. The legal and investigative response to the Farmington shooting was methodical and comprehensive. Authorities conducted interviews with family, neighbors, and anyone who had interacted with Wilson in the months prior to the attack. Social media activity, personal communications, and digital footprints were scrutinized for clues about motive and planning. The findings confirmed that Wilson had acted alone, without accomplices, and that the attack had been premeditated to some degree, though the exact triggers remain unclear. Law enforcement officials emphasized the importance of community awareness, mental health intervention, and rapid response in mitigating the risk of similar incidents. The broader implications of the Farmington shooting extend into public policy and community preparedness. Such attacks, though statistically rare, demonstrate how vulnerable communities can be to sudden acts of violence. Schools, neighborhood associations, and local government agencies often review incidents like this to improve safety protocols, communication networks, and mental health resources. The Farmington case became a reference point for emergency response planning, highlighting both successes in the quick neutralization of the shooter and areas for improvement, particularly in identifying potential threats before they manifest violently. Psychological analysis of mass shooters often emphasizes the role of social isolation, identity struggles, and untreated mental health conditions. While Bo Wilson's precise psychological profile remains confidential due to privacy and ongoing legal considerations, experts note that the combination of youth, access to firearms, and personal stressors can create a volatile mix. Community awareness programs and early intervention strategies are increasingly promoted as essential tools to prevent such tragedies, underscoring the importance of mental health education alongside traditional crime prevention methods. The aftermath of the shooting also raised questions about gun access and firearm safety in residential neighborhoods. Though Wilson obtained weapons legally, the incident renewed debates on how to balance constitutional rights with public safety, particularly concerning young adults. Legislators, advocacy groups, and citizens engaged in dialogue about background checks, mental health screenings, and community accountability, seeking ways to reduce the likelihood of similar incidents while respecting individual freedoms. In the wake of the tragedy, Farmington demonstrated resilience. Community leaders organized support networks for the victims' families, providing counseling, financial assistance, and public recognition of the lives lost. Neighbors came together to reinforce community ties, holding neighborhood watch meetings and educational events aimed at fostering safety and vigilance. These efforts, though they could not undo the harm, reflected a collective commitment to healing and prevention. The Farmington shooting also serves as a stark reminder of the vulnerability of seemingly ordinary communities. The victims were everyday citizens, living lives of quiet contribution and dignity. The perpetrator was a young man whose outward demeanor had not triggered alarms. This combination of normalcy and unpredictability highlights the importance of vigilance, community cohesion, and proactive mental health support. It also underscores the devastating randomness of some acts of violence, a reality that communities must confront while balancing fear with practical preparedness. Ultimately, the Farmington shooting is remembered for both the lives lost and the lessons it imparts. Gwendolyn Schofield, Melody Ivy, and Shirley Voiter are honored not only for who they were, but also for the legacy of community awareness and solidarity that arose in response to their deaths. The tragedy reminds us that even in quiet towns, acts of violence can occur, and that preparedness, compassion, and rapid response are essential in mitigating their effects. For law enforcement, mental health professionals, and the community at large, the Farmington shooting serves as a case study in understanding youth violence, recognizing warning signs, and fostering resilience in the face of the incomprehensible. In reflecting on the event, one is struck not only by the senselessness of the violence, but also by the courage and humanity displayed in its aftermath. First responders acted decisively, neighbors supported one another, and families sought to honor their loved ones through remembrance and advocacy. The shooting left a permanent mark on Farmington, yet it also galvanized a commitment to understanding, prevention, and remembrance. Through tragedy, the community learned that vigilance, connection, and proactive engagement can be powerful tools against the unpredictable forces of violence, ensuring that the memory of the victims continues to shape a safer and more aware society. In the 1980s and 1990s, New Mexico became the haunting backdrop for one of the most infamous serial predator cases in U.S. history, the crimes of David Parker Ray, later dubbed the Toy Box Killer. Ray was a man whose outward appearance and lifestyle masked a level of depravity so extreme that even seasoned investigators were shocked by the scale and sadistic creativity of his crimes. Operating primarily in the areas around Elephant Butte and Belen, Ray orchestrated a series of kidnappings, tortures, and suspected murders, leaving a chilling legacy that continues to fascinate criminologists, psychologists, and true crime enthusiasts alike. David Parker Ray was born in 1939, and by adulthood, he exhibited behaviors and tendencies that would later be interpreted as classic signs of sadistic psychopathology. He was meticulous, organized, and socially functional in many respects, a man capable of interacting with neighbors, maintaining employment, and presenting a facade of normalcy while harboring horrific intentions. For years, he lived in relative anonymity, cultivating relationships with women who became victims of his manipulative schemes. Psychologists analyzing the case later noted that Ray combined charm, coercion, and psychological manipulation to control his victims, creating an environment where resistance was often psychologically impossible. Ray's crimes revolved around a soundproofed trailer he had purchased, which became infamous as the Toy Box. Inside, he had rigged the space with an array of tools designed for torture, including surgical instruments, restraints, soundproofing, and devices intended to inflict extreme physical and psychological pain. Ray's victims, often women who were kidnapped from the local area, were subjected to elaborate methods of control and abuse. He kept detailed notes and audio recordings of his interactions with victims, providing chilling insight into the extent of his sadism and the systematic nature of his offenses. The known victims of Ray's crimes were subjected to unimaginable suffering. Some were held for days, during which he employed methods designed to induce fear, pain, and submission. Victims described being restrained, physically assaulted, and psychologically terrorized, often while he cataloged their responses for his own gratification. Though not all of Ray's suspected murders could be definitively proven in court, the level of premeditation and cruelty in his known offenses suggested that many had likely ended in death. The uncertainty surrounding the total number of victims has fueled speculation and horror for decades. Investigations into Ray's activities were complex and protracted. Law enforcement became aware of his crimes through a combination of witness reports, victim escapes, and eventually physical evidence collected in and around his property. Ray's manipulations extended to his community interactions. He was careful to maintain a facade of normalcy while using his victims' vulnerabilities to his advantage. Authorities faced the challenge of untangling his meticulously constructed narratives, which included coercion, intimidation, and elaborate schemes designed to prevent victims from coming forward. Ray's criminal methods demonstrated a terrifying mix of ingenuity and calculated cruelty. He employed an extensive knowledge of human anatomy and psychology to inflict maximum pain, often using soundproofing and restraints to isolate victims completely. Some reports indicate that he used audio recordings to further torment them, capturing their fear and humiliation. Ray's approach was not chaotic but methodical, reflecting a level of planning that is consistent with organized, predatory offenders who are capable of evading suspicion for extended periods. The very existence of the toy box trailer symbolizes the intersection of mechanical ingenuity and sadistic imagination, representing a nightmare of modern criminality. Despite the extreme nature of his offenses, Ray initially avoided significant legal consequences. He was able to blend into his community, maintaining appearances while committing acts that would later horrify investigators. This duality, ordinary neighbor by day, torturer by night, made the case especially compelling to criminal psychologists and criminologists. It also highlighted the challenges faced by law enforcement when offenders are organized, intelligent, and socially functional. The gap between Ray's public persona and private horrors underscores the difficulty of detecting such criminals before tragedy strikes. Ray's eventual arrest and conviction came as a result of meticulous investigative work, victim testimony, and the careful collection of physical evidence. He was convicted of multiple charges, including kidnapping and torture, and was sentenced to lengthy prison terms. While not all of his suspected murders could be legally proven, investigators strongly believe that the number of victims is higher than those formally documented. The combination of courtroom evidence and survivor accounts painted a picture of a man whose cruelty was systematic, sadistic, and unrelenting. A predator whose capacity for planning and manipulation made him exceptionally dangerous. The psychological and social implications of Ray's crimes have been widely studied. Experts note that he exhibited traits of psychopathy, including lack of empathy, superficial charm, manipulativeness, and extreme sadistic tendencies. He targeted women who were vulnerable, using fear and coercion to control them completely. The case illustrates the danger posed by individuals who combine intelligence with psychopathy and underscores the importance of understanding predatory behavior in both criminal psychology and law enforcement training. Ray's ability to conceal his crimes for years is a stark reminder of the need for vigilance, particularly in communities where vulnerable populations may be at risk. The victims of Ray's crimes, those who survived, played a crucial role in bringing him to justice. Their testimony, bravery, and willingness to recount experiences of extreme terror were instrumental in securing convictions. Survivors face the long-term effects of trauma, including PTSD, anxiety, and the struggle to rebuild their lives after experiences designed to strip away autonomy and dignity. Their resilience, courage, and determination to see justice served have become central narratives in the study of criminal justice, trauma recovery, and victim advocacy. David Parker Ray's case also prompted discussions about community safety, the role of social services, and the early detection of predatory behavior. The existence of the toy box trailer, with its instruments and recordings, became a symbol of organized, sadistic criminality and served as a grim warning of the capacity for human cruelty. Law enforcement agencies and criminal psychologists often cite Ray when training officers on the identification of organized offenders and the complex interplay of social, psychological, and environmental factors that can enable prolonged criminal activity. Ultimately, the story of David Parker Ray is a chilling exploration of the darkest aspects of human behavior. It combines elements of horror, criminal ingenuity, and the terrifying reality that some individuals can manipulate appearances, prey on vulnerability, and evade detection for years. While Ray died in prison in 2002, the legacy of his crimes endures in the memories of survivors, the nightmares of those who study him, and the ongoing work of law enforcement to prevent similar predation. The Toy Box Killer remains a benchmark case in the annals of true crime and criminal psychology. It is a story of terror and suffering, but also of resilience, investigative skill, and the capacity for justice to prevail, even against the most calculated and sadistic offenders. The case reminds us that evil often hides behind ordinary facades, that vulnerability can be exploited in insidious ways, and that society must remain vigilant to protect the defenseless. Ray's crimes, while extreme, illuminate critical lessons about human behavior, criminal detection, and the enduring need for empathy, awareness, and justice. In 2016, the Navajo Nation in New Mexico became the site of a tragedy that would shock communities across the region and highlight enduring concerns about child safety and violence in Native American communities. The victim, Ashlyn Mike, was just 11 years old, a young girl whose life had been filled with family, school, and the ordinary joys of childhood. Her death, at the hands of Tom Begay Jr., was not only a personal tragedy for her loved ones, but also a stark reminder of the vulnerabilities faced by children and the critical importance of community vigilance and law enforcement intervention. Ashlyn Mike was described by family and friends as bright, cheerful, and full of life. Living within the close-knit Navajo Nation community, she had friends at school, enjoyed participating in family events, and was known for her curiosity and warmth. Her young life, like that of any child, should have been a protected space of learning, play, and growth. Tragically, these protections failed when she became the target of a violent predator who exploited her innocence. The perpetrator, Tom Begay Jr., was known within the community to some extent, but not as a person whose behavior immediately suggested extreme danger. However, investigators later determined that Begay Jr. had a history that, in hindsight, pointed toward escalating criminal tendencies. On the day of Ashlyn's abduction, he seized the opportunity to commit acts of violence that would ultimately take her life. The randomness of the location and the quietness of the community meant that immediate intervention was difficult, underscoring the unique challenges law enforcement faces in rural and tribal regions. The abduction itself was swift and terrifying. Ashlyn was taken from a familiar environment, thrust into the control of an adult perpetrator whose intent was both sexual and lethal. Investigators later revealed that Begay Jr. had planned the crime to some degree, demonstrating awareness of the risks and consequences, but also a disturbing disregard for human life. The victim's vulnerability, a child in a community where adults are often familiar and trusting, was exploited in a way that made the crime especially heinous. Law enforcement response was initiated quickly, with tribal police and federal authorities coordinating to locate Ashlyn. The geographic challenges of the Navajo Nation, vast landscapes, remote areas, and limited infrastructure complicated the search. Despite these obstacles, investigators acted decisively, using a combination of local knowledge, forensic expertise, and coordination with federal agencies to track Begay Jr. and recover evidence. Their efforts reflected both urgency and methodical planning, highlighting the complexity of conducting criminal investigations in rural and tribal jurisdictions. The discovery of Ashlyn's body confirmed the worst fears of the community. The details of her death were harrowing, reflecting the extreme violence perpetrated by Begay Jr. Forensic examinations revealed the physical trauma inflicted upon her, as well as evidence of sexual assault. The brutality of the crime prompted outrage and grief, galvanizing the community to demand justice and reforms to protect vulnerable children. Vigils, memorials, and public statements emphasized both mourning and the collective responsibility to prevent similar tragedies in the future. Begay Jr.'s arrest and prosecution were marked by clear evidence of guilt. He pleaded guilty to murder, kidnapping, and sexual assault, a rare admission that allowed the judicial process to proceed without the extended uncertainty of a prolonged trial. The plea reflected both the overwhelming evidence against him and a recognition of the crime's severity. In court, details of the abduction, assault, and murder were presented, underscoring the premeditated nature of the crime and the calculated cruelty of the offender. The sentencing was unequivocal. Begay Jr. received life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, reflecting the gravity of taking a child's life and the societal imperative to remove dangerous individuals from communities permanently. Legal scholars and community leaders noted that such sentences serve not only as punishment, but also as a deterrent, reinforcing the principle that crimes against children are among the most severely punished in the criminal justice system. The Ashlyn Mike case has broader implications for child safety, law enforcement, and community awareness. The tragedy highlighted vulnerabilities in rural and tribal areas, where law enforcement resources may be stretched and response times delayed due to geography and infrastructure. It also emphasized the importance of education for families and children regarding potential dangers, as well as the need for vigilance within communities where trust is traditionally high, but where predators may still exist. Psychologists analyzing the case observed that offenders like Begay Jr. often display patterns of predatory behavior that escalate over time. His willingness to commit extreme violence against a child demonstrates a combination of impulsivity, disregard for social norms, and predatory planning. Understanding such behavior is crucial for law enforcement and mental health professionals seeking to prevent similar tragedies. Training in recognizing warning signs, intervening early, and coordinating responses across jurisdictions is a key lesson from this case. The community response to Ashlyn's death also underscores resilience and collective action. Local organizations, tribal leadership, and advocacy groups worked together to provide counseling and support for grieving families. Memorials and community events honored Ashlyn's memory, while reinforcing awareness about child safety and the need for proactive protection measures. Her story became a symbol of both tragedy and the importance of vigilance, inspiring efforts to strengthen child welfare policies within the Navajo Nation and beyond. Media coverage of the case brought national attention to the unique challenges faced by Native American communities in responding to violent crimes. Journalists highlighted the geographic and jurisdictional complexities, the vulnerabilities of children in such areas, and the importance of coordinated law enforcement efforts. Coverage also amplified calls for resources, including training, mental health support, and child protection services, to prevent similar crimes in the future. In reflecting on the Ashlyn Mike case, one is confronted with both horror and hope. The crime itself was brutal, senseless, and deeply unjust. Yet the response by law enforcement, the courts, the community, and advocates demonstrates a collective commitment to justice, accountability, and prevention. Ashlyn's life, though tragically cut short, continues to influence policies, awareness campaigns, and community vigilance aimed at protecting children from predation. Ultimately, the Ashlyn Mike case is a stark reminder of the vulnerabilities that children face, the potential for violence in seemingly safe environments, and the importance of swift and coordinated action to protect the innocent. It illustrates the devastating consequences of predatory behavior, the necessity of effective law enforcement and judicial intervention, and the resilience of communities determined to honor victims while preventing future tragedies. Ashlyn's memory endures as both a cautionary tale and a symbol of the enduring need for vigilance, justice, and the protection of society's most vulnerable members.